Hey there. If you're a frequent listener to our show, you already know that our show is brought to you by our friends over at Artillery Sports. But what you may not know is that Artillery Sports helps athletes of all types win on and off the course and court. They do this by selling quality, durable, and precision manufactured sports equipment that keeps you in the game, while also using a portion of the profits to provide the funding needed to care for our nation's veterans. With Artillery Sports, it's more than just a game. So head over to artillerysports.com today to buy the quality equipment you need to keep you in the game and to help our nation's veterans at the same time. That's artillerysports.com. Make sure you head on over there today. Oh, and use the code DOCFIRST to get 10% off your first order. Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look into documentary filmmaking. I'm your host, Christian Taylor, and today I'm joined by a storied documentary film producer and photojournalist, Brian Skerry. Welcome, Brian. Really nice to have you on the show.
Well, it's so great to be here, Christian. Thank you.
It's beautiful for you to make time for us, but before we start, I just want to jump in. You have an amazing bio, and I really would love to read every single thing in it. But I can't. So if people have time, they need to look you up and they need to see everything that you have done. But I'm going to dive right in and read some of the important recent things. So Brian Skerry is a film producer, director, and veteran photojournalist specializing in marine wildlife and underwater realms. Brian's signature style is to create intimate stories and visuals that inspire audiences to see the world in new ways. His recent documentary film credits include Secrets of the Whales and Return of the White Shark, both currently streaming on Disney+. However, on July 24th, a new documentary 3-part special series for PBS Nova will debut, and we're going to talk about that today. In 2021, Brian received the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Documentary as a producer of Secrets of the Whales. Since 1998, Brian has been a contributing photographer for National Geographic magazine, where he has created and photographed more than 30 feature stories, including 7 cover stories. His work has also been featured in publications such as Sports Illustrated, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Paris Match, Esquire, and Audubon. He is an 11-time award winner in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition held in London, and he's also been recognized with awards from Pictures of the Year International, Nature's Best Communication Arts, and is the only photographer to win the coveted Peter Benchley Award for Excellence in Media. And that is just a portion of all of his accolades. So I am just honored to be here and to pick your brain. We are here to talk about this new thing coming up, Sea Change, but I do hope that you will share with us some of your expertise and how you got started in the business, because I feel like we have a lot to learn from you.
Well, thank you very much, Christian. That's very kind. And I hope I don't disappoint after all of that. My goodness. Thanks.
Well, no, I mean, it is your bio, so certainly you have some history that you can share with us. So speaking of that history, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started in this whole filmmaking game?
Yeah, well, I started out as a diver. I guess that's where it all began for me. As a young boy, I grew up in a little working class town, a textile mill town in Massachusetts, west of Boston. And I didn't live on the ocean. I didn't know anybody who did anything like that, but I was reading National Geographic magazine, watching the old Cousteau documentaries as a kid, the TV show, and just dreamed about doing that kind of work, being an ocean explorer. So I actually started scuba diving when I was about 15 years old. And initially, for me, that was the end game. I just wanted to be a diver explorer of the ocean. But maybe a year or two after that, I attended a diving show, a conference in Boston. And as a teenager, I was sitting in that darkened audience and I watched underwater photographers and filmmakers presenting their work. And I often describe it as an epiphany where a light went on in my head. And I realized that's how I want to explore the ocean, was with a camera. I remember telling my girlfriend that evening as we were riding back on a train, the commuter rail back to my car. I said, I know what I want to do with my life. I want to be an underwater photographer, filmmaker, And but again, I had no idea how to do that, and I didn't know anybody who did anything like that. It was, in hindsight, an extremely lofty dream. But I ended up coming up with a little plan. I went to college. Very soon after that, I studied photography, photojournalism. I was a communications media major, so I could take classes in filmmaking, television production, animation, all of those things. However, I was learning sort of the fundamentals of those things, photography and so forth. I learned about f-stops and shutter speeds and composition, but I was working underwater. I bought myself an old, used underwater camera back in those days, sort of taught myself how to use that, and was making very bad pictures, terrible photos, but eventually chipped away at it. I worked on charter boats. I wasn't being paid. I just go out on these boats um, uh, for no pay, but to be able to have access to diving help her on the boat and so forth. And my goal from those early days was to either do one or two things. I either wanted to be an underwater documentary filmmaker, like the people I was admiring, watching their films. And in those days, there was maybe a handful of people who were doing that kind of stuff. Or I wanted to be a National Geographic magazine photographer. And both, again, were these extremely exclusive clubs. At National Geographic in those days, there was 3 underwater photographers, all very prolific, and they didn't seem to want to be going anywhere anytime soon. They were well established and, didn't want anybody butting into the club. But after school, I worked many different jobs, but I always had the photo business on the side. I spent my money on equipment, on cameras and underwater housings and dive equipment. And when I started to save up enough money, I began to travel and shoot in other places. I was doing stories and assignments for other magazines, dive magazines, for Snow Country magazine, who wanted to do a story on the Olympic ski team who was training in a swimming pool with a physical therapist. So anything I could do to build up my portfolio. And then eventually in the late 90s, I got my first assignment with National Geographic. And it was a difficult story, but they liked what I did. They sort of made a decision to develop me as one of their regular shooters. So that sort of came first, and it was something I very much wanted to do. So for a while, I put the documentary film or video on the back burner. I mean, back in those days, what little I was doing, I was shooting 16 millimeter or film and things like that. And I went into photography, which was a very wonderful thing for me to get that first assignment. And now 26 years later, I just had my 33rd story in the magazine. I had a cover story last month in the June issue of National Geographic. So it's been absolutely fantastic. I love still photography. I love the notion of photojournalism, particularly in wildlife for me, and being able to do this as a living for over almost 3 decades. However, I also never lost my love of documentary film, and I realized that there's great value in storytelling in both mediums, and nowadays in other mediums too. Vision Pro glasses or immersive experiences. There's all new ways to express these stories. So I over the years I did a little dabbling in that. I did a Nova documentary back in the early 2000s or late 90s. It was a shipwreck story, but really was mostly still photography for most of that career. But in 2021, I released Secrets of the Whales, which was a project that I created in 2017 for National Geographic and Disney, and then served as a producer. So I didn't have the camera in my hand. I was also parallel shooting a story for the magazine, a 40-page cover story for National Geographic, and producing the documentary series as well. So that was sort of my re-emergence into that field a little bit, and in a big way, really. And hiring cameramen with the production company and sort of crafting what became Secrets of the Whales, which is still streaming now on Disney Plus. And then right on the heels of that, I pitched another story with a friend of mine, Adam Geiger, and his wife, Colette Beaudry, who own Sea Light Pictures in Australia. We pitched that to National Geographic about great white sharks on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, sort of the reemergence of white sharks there, this reconstruction of an ecosystem that existed long ago. And then we spent 2 years working on that. And then that, while that was happening, I began this PBS documentary series, Sea Change, as well. So, and I have to just say a little, postscript to that is that as much as I love having that camera in my hand, and will still be doing that, I do sort of relish this role as producer and director because as I start to look back on my career, I've learned a few things and I know a little bit about animals and behavior, and I know how to put the pieces together. Those 30 odd stories that I did for National Geographic magazine, I served not only as the photographer, I mean, that's my credit is photographer, but nearly every one of those stories was an idea that I proposed. And then if it gets approved, I have to come up with a budget. And in order to create a budget, I had to figure out the logistics. So, before I even proposed a story to the magazine, I might spend a year doing research and know where it is I want to go and what time of year I'm going to be there, and talk to scientists about what the likelihood of seeing these animals and getting close to them, and what's the visibility going to be like, and what's the weather going to be like. So I was producing all of those stories realistically, as well as photographing them, and then working on the edit with my photo editor, and then working on layout. So in many ways, I think there, for me, is a lot of parallels between my still photography career and producing documentaries now today. I think there's a lot in common.
I totally agree. I do want to go back because we went through a whole career there in just about 8 minutes.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to the beginning because you did start out like a lot of filmmakers start out really young, having these lofty ideas of this is what I want to do in the film industry or the photography industry, and you volunteer. I'm going to volunteer here. I'm going to spend my time doing this. When you're in high school or early college, we have the luxury of doing that when, maybe we're in under our parents' roof or whatever. But then there's this time where we do have to make a living somehow and also, do our craft at the same time.
Yeah.
So how did you support yourself? What was your day job after college when you were trying to make this work? How am I going to pay for myself while I continue to learn, while I'm trying to get a job in this industry? How did you make that work?
Yeah, well, it's a really great question, Christian, and I'm glad you asked it because, as I alluded to, I came from rather humble beginnings. This little, as I say, textile mill town. My parents were not affluent. I didn't get on an airplane until I was 26 years old. I flew to Florida from Boston to do a dive trip, and I felt like I was going to Australia or someplace. I thought it was a exotic trip. So I didn't have the resources to do anything. So I absolutely had to work and support myself and pay the bills and also buy equipment to do the thing that I really wanted to do. So I worked a number of different jobs, but for a number of those years, I went back to a job that I had when I was in college. I got a job, a very unsexy, unromantic thing. I was working at in a factory that made corrugated boxes. It was a private company in Massachusetts, family-owned business. They ultimately were acquired by Georgia Pacific, a big paper company. And, I remember in the summers as a college student working out in the factory, second shift, third shift out there. And then after college, I did a few other jobs. I was literally working in convenience stores or, working in landscaping, different things like that. But I needed money, and I knew this company paid, real money for that kind of work. So I remember wanting to buy this new Nikon, I think it was a D3 camera and an underwater housing. So I said, well, I'm just going to go back and work for, a couple of months and make the money. Well, it turned into years. It turned into several years. And I went from working in the factory to being a sales rep on the road. I had a company car. I was dressing in nice suits, opening new business. I think I ultimately brought in, I don't know, $5 million in new business for this company, became one of their top sales reps. So here I was sort of living this, for a lot of people, maybe a dream, the American dream. I had a good job. I had a 401k. I had, retirement. I had benefits, health care. And I literally jumped off a cliff one day and just said, I couldn't do it anymore. And no, dispersions on people who do that. I mean, a lot of friends that still do that, but it was eating me up inside because I knew what I wanted to do, and I felt if given a chance, I could do it. So I jumped off a cliff. I remember my father, in shock, saying to me, "Wait a minute, what? Let me get this straight. You're gonna give that all up to go do what? Take pictures? That's insane." But he came from that era. He was in World War II and grew up in the Depression, and the idea of having a job with benefits was what you aspired to, not to be some vagabond, traveling around the ocean trying to take pictures of fish. So, to the day he passed, he never really understood. But I have to say that I never looked back. I remember around that time watching this documentary series on PBS about Joseph Campbell and the power of myth, and he talked in there about Campbell saying that many people in life are on a set of train tracks going in one direction, and right next to them is a parallel set of tracks that would make them much more happy, or it's sort of what their destiny, what really is, and they just need to make that jump. And that it so many times when people do, these invisible hands of the universe, God, whatever, comes out to support you. And I remembered holding close to that. It was like, well, I hope that's true. And I can't speak for anybody else, but I can say for me, I made that leap of faith, and honestly, never regretted it for a day. Never looked back. Conversely, or in addition, I would add that the skills, the experience I had in manufacturing, in sales, in doing those jobs that I did, while I didn't like it at the time, I think they paid dividends in my career as a photographer and as a filmmaker. In my work as a storyteller, on one day I might be dealing with a PhD scientist at some prestigious institution, and I have to be able to communicate effectively to them, or a fisherman who is in high school in some country where I don't really speak the language, but knowing how to navigate people, to understand people, I think, even though I work in wildlife, is very important. And to be able to sell my ideas, being able to go into an executive's office at a streaming platform or publishing company with an idea and get that message communicated effectively. I think what came from me in that world where I was selling boxes. If I could sell boxes, I could sell an idea about a shark documentary. So at least I think I could. So anyway, that was sort of my trajectory. And at the time, it was all very messy and confusing and filled with angst. But looking back now, it was all good.
I'm so glad I asked that question, actually, because that is a fascinating story. And I think so many people in our industry find themselves in that quandary. And it is a very risky proposition and a very scary proposition to take that, leave that security of that day job where you have been successful. But, not only, I can imagine, not only those people skills that you learned while you were in that sales job, but you're organizing yourself, you're organizing your time, you are learning logistics, you are learning how, you're learning about travel, you're learning how to make schedules, you are learning budgets, you are learning so many different skills while you are having a 401k, while you are having stability. And And that stability gives you the ability to buy equipment and then to practice on your own. So there were so many advantages during that time to having that stable job that gave you that launching pad and that security to be able to jump to that parallel track. And so when people are in that situation where they are in this job that they don't want to be in and they do want to do another thing, I think it is important for them to realize there is a tipping point will come at some point, where yes, you want to be a filmmaker, or yes, you want to be a cinematographer, or you want to work in sound and you want to do that for a living and you want to get paid and you want to be out of this, job. And you just will know, but you've got to keep building up that platform in order to jump to that other parallel track, I think. And I guess what I really want to know is, what age were you at that time? And
I was well into my 30s at that point, and again, I had built a reasonable or reasonably robust photo business. I was selling photos for stock. I was doing assignments for magazines. I was doing speaking engagements. I had written a
on
book.
The side.
Yeah, all on the side. And again, one of the luxuries of having a sales job, a sales career, was that as long as I was managing my own business, even though I was working for a company, in many ways I was running my own little business there, and I had my own accounts and I had relationships with these people, and I could take a week, a Friday or a Monday off, or maybe even a week off, as long as I was staying in touch with people and everybody was content and happy. And, if something came up, I could react, but I could, go out and shoot. I couldn't go to Australia, but I could shoot in New England where I was living. So if I took 3 or 4 days and was working on a personal project, that was fine, because my business was managing itself, and if somebody needed me, whatever. So I sort of had that luxury of being able to do that. I think if you're working a real hard and fast 9-to-5 job or something, it might be a little harder. You have to kind of relegate yourself to weekends or days off or vacations. But I could massage it a little bit and do things my own way. But yeah, I think your analysis overall was perfect. That is exactly right. I learned a lot during that time, and I think nothing is wasted. I really believe that. There's, I'm sure, so many people like I was out there that just hated what they're doing. They're sort of despising what they're doing. They're saying, this is not me. I know I could be doing this, and that's what I should be doing. But you're right. The tipping point will come, and understanding where you are today and where you want to be is a big part of that equation. And I always tell people to have a strategy. You can be flexible and it may change, but what is the strategy? When photographers come to me and say, I want to do what you do, I say, well, all right, where are you now? If you're in college, if you're studying photography or whatever, that's great. But recognize that what is going to get you that job is a portfolio. You will either be hired or not be hired on your portfolio. So what do you need to do between now and 5 years from now, or however long it is, to produce a really strong portfolio? And if you want to do what I do, you need to shoot photojournalistically. It's not just about the beautiful photos. You have to do those too, but you got to be able to tell a story. So, maybe you take workshops, maybe you work on personal projects, maybe you team up with a friend or somebody who can write, or if you can write, you go out and shoot a story, you edit it tightly, you pitch it to some local publications or write it as well and make the editor's job easy. And the same thing with video. You're producing a reel, you're working on little personal projects where you can have sequences that actually show how to comprehend visual storytelling in motion, that you can produce these sequences and scenes. Maybe you've got stock footage that you're selling on the side, which can be lucrative these days. So always. So I think, having a strategy, understanding where it is you want to be, giving yourself a timeline, working on goals along the way. Where do I want to be in a year? Where do I want to be in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? I think that's an important part of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah, interestingly enough, I am a voiceover actor and I'm
Nice.
also a voiceover coach. And I've been in this acting voiceover industry for about 40 years.
Mm,
And a lot of people, I've done some coaching as well. And so a lot of people will come to me and say, how can I do this? I want to do this as a living. And I
mm,
always tell them it is really important that you keep your day job and you continue practicing your craft on the side,
mm,
and you are taking classes and you are studying from other people, and you are building up a nest egg from which you are able to buy equipment. And then at some point, when you are ready and your skills are ready and you've have a proof of concept that you
mm,
can do this job and make money by working nights and weekends or whatever, and you have 6 months of income saved up, then you can make that jump, and you're making a plan. You have to make a plan
mm,
in order to transition to this thing that you really want to do. And
mm.
it's the same in voiceover, it's the same in photography, cinematography,
Yeah,
sound, whichever creative endeavor I think that you want to go into. It is important to have a plan. It's important to save your money, and it can be done. It can
yeah.
be done. You just have to have a plan. You have to have the will and to never quit.
That's perfect advice. Perfect advice. And what you mentioned earlier too about the business side of things, understanding the money side and the budget side. So many artists neglect that, or historically have sort of neglected that side, but that's what's going to keep you going. I mean, if you understand how to do that, and the most successful people that I work with today, young emerging photographers, filmmakers, DPs, everybody, they're all struggling out there, but there are some that are just doing it a little bit better. They know how to add value to what they do. They know how to manage their money. They know how to where to give and take and so forth. And those are skills that you can absolutely learn. You're not born with them, and you have to learn them. But recognizing that that's an important part is you can have your own little epiphany, because if you want to last in this business, you got to be able to support yourself.
Absolutely. Now, one other thing, I want to skip ahead
Mm,
because you then talk about, okay, you went into photojournalism, photography, then photojournalism, but then
mm,
all of a sudden you're producing. You're
yeah.
producing these films. Now, producing is a special skill set
Mhm.
where it's not just telling people what to do, or, I mean, it's a very complicated, you're managing time, you're managing people, you're managing money,
Mm,
budgets, you're managing all sorts of things.
yeah.
And I tell people I became a producer as well. I'm a filmmaker, and I became a producer because I was a mom. I was a mom
Nice.
first, and I had to do all of those things as a mom. So no, I didn't go to school, but
Yeah.
I learned along the way. So I wonder how you learned along the way, because I don't think you went to school to become a producer per se,
No,
right?
no, I didn't. And I didn't, feel that that was even necessary for me. I mean, at that point in my career, when I began producing, um, it was largely because I think I was driving the story. In each of these three most recent documentary projects that you outlined, so Secrets of the Whales, Return of the White Shark, and now Sea Change. Um, I served as a producer after I created the idea. So
Okay.
these were my ideas, and I would go and pitch them. And then once they were greenlit, if they were greenlit, and they were, I would serve as producer. But that was because I sort of had a vision for what this story was. I had done the research. I knew, just like with my magazine stories, I might spend a year figuring out what that story is and knowing where to go at what time of year and what researchers to work with, where to get a boat or a helicopter, or the nuts and bolts of how to produce it. I knew if I wasn't going to be doing the camera work, I knew the best um, camera operators to hire, or the various expertise that we needed to bring into those projects. And it wasn't completely me. And again, I had two other producers, like on the most recent one, for example, Sea Change. I worked with Chun Wei Yi and his wife Stella Cha, who were very experienced in the television business. And so when it came to hiring the editing team or different things, music and scoring the music and so forth, they had expertise in that. So again, television and film, as we all know, is a much more collaborative process than even still photography, which is a little bit more solitary. For many of those years, it was just me and an assistant out there, and then I'd come back and work with editors and layout people. But with film, it's a lot different. So I don't want to imply that I alone can do this. It wasn't me, but I, sort of moved into the role of producer, I think largely because these were my ideas, and I had it all sort of mapped out as best we could, and brought that sort of experience to the table, I guess.
Well, and truthfully, what you're saying is I was a photojournalist. So you've got the visuals, then you have the story idea, and then you're kind of putting it all together. And because you've actually done it yourself, you have the how to and you've spent the money. So you've now put it all together and you can sit at the top of the project and say, I know how to do this from all those different small pieces.
Hmm.
And I think it's, fascinating because what you've done then is before you've become this producer, you've done the writing, you've done the
Mhm.
directing,
Hmm.
you've done the cinematography. You learned all of those pieces beforehand, kind of on your own. So once you've created the story and you've found it, and you've been your own pitch man, so you've been your executive producer also.
Yeah.
You've kind of been able to do all that,
Yeah.
and that's just fascinating to me. You put all those skills together, and then you can sit at the top and tell people this is what I want it to be like.
Yeah, no, that's also a great analysis. And I would add too, though, that with each of these projects, I'm of course, in the documentary natural history world, the producer is also often a director, as you just pointed out.
Yep.
So, in many of these cases, like on Sea Change, I had great cameramen working with me. Former assistant who's a great DP now, doing really wonderful big projects. But I would physically get in the water with him. So I'd put on my dry suit and my
I'm
tanks,
sure
and,
you
you
can't
know,
help it.
and I'm shooting alongside of him, and you know I remember this one day we were shooting a sea urchin bed, and um, I stopped him, and he's great visual. I mean, he's probably far better than me, but I knew what I wanted, and I kind of tapped him on the shoulder. And I said, "Wait, do this," and I pretended to have the camera in my hand, and I swam up over this bed of sea urchins and said, I want you to look down like a bird's eye view. And then he understood and he did it. And then when he came back, he kind of looked at me and I said, okay, do it again. Do it 3 or 4 times. I want to get it. But so I'm actually down there. There were days where I was doing lighting for him. We didn't, his assistant didn't show up or whatever. So I'm down there in 40-degree water, holding a light as he's doing a macro sequence. But I'm, kind of looking at the monitor too, and trying to see what the scene looks like. And we shot a scene with alewife, these river herring. That's actually a positive story of restoration in the Gulf of Maine. And my other DP that we had, I had shot this for my cover story for National Geographic. So I knew the logistics. We went to this river, the herring were running, the alewife were running. And, I said, well, all right, get in the river here. And he's a very shallow water. I mean, he's most of his body is out of water. He's got the camera under, but the monitor could be over. So I'm, sort of in this twister position where I got one leg on a rock and another leg on another rock and a hand on his shoulder. And I'm looking at the monitor and, and I'm saying, move it a little bit this way. There's a ray of light coming in here, or we're trying to capture things. So, and so I love the visual part of it, of course. And maybe my deficit is that I see things in a still frame a lot of times, and I need to be a little more motion oriented. But nonetheless, it's all fun, and the producing is what I'm used to doing, and then the visual part certainly is too. So it all comes together for me nicely.
I'm so glad you explained that because I am insanely curious about the actual, machinations about how that all comes together. Because, I mean, how the heck do you direct underwater? I've always wondered that, how do you light underwater? And it's just, it just seems all so complicated and magical to me. I just watch these nature documentaries just incessantly, and to try to figure out how the heck you guys do these things. So we're going to get to that in a few minutes. Right
Okay.
now, I want to give the introduction to Sea Change, and we're going to just dive into to this documentary series that you're doing because it's super fascinating. All right, so let's talk about this. Sea Change, the Gulf of Maine, a Nova Special presentation, explores a body of water that is warming 97% faster than the global ocean, and what that means for the Gulf of Maine, for the animals, for the jobs dependent upon it, and the millions of people along its shores, and may serve as a preview of what could happen worldwide due to climate change. So this is Sea Change, a 3-part special series on PBS Nova that is starting July 24th. And right away, I'm going to start with the tough questions.
Okay.
And we're going to step away from the filmmaking just a little bit because I have to tell you, I really enjoyed, I watched the first 2 of this series. And I really enjoyed it. It was well shot. I thought it was incredibly interesting. I learned a lot of new things that I actually always wondered about and didn't know. And so I learned a lot. It did everything that you hope a documentary would do. However, at the beginning, I almost just part of my brain shut off because this clearly was about the earth warming and climate change, and humans are responsible. And what are we going to do? This climate change is now affecting everything, and if we're not careful, it's going to destroy the habitat and affect everyone. Now, that is all true. I actually believe all of that. I know that we have been a participant in climate change happening. I also think that climate change just happens as part of natural life, and it's happened over billions of years of our earth. But it's happening, and it's real. But we hear it all the time. It's almost become background noise now because as many documentaries, nature documentaries as I watch, they are all talking about this climate change in order to convince us that climate change is happening, and it's going to affect not only our natural environment, but it will ultimately impact us, which is what you're saying here. This is going to impact our lives, what we eat, what we can't eat, etc. Now, so part of me was like, okay, yes, I know that message, which is why I think I took in all of the stuff that I didn't know. But I want to ask you, why is it so important to get out that message of climate change and everything is, going to hell in a handbasket when we hear it so much already?
Well, that is a really important question, Christian, and I'm really glad you asked it. Let me offer some context that I have, my perspective that I've learned throughout 47 years of exploring Earth's oceans and trying to tell stories about this planet. We live on an ocean world. We live on an ocean planet. It's often been said, and we've learned in school, that about 72% of Earth's surface is ocean, is water. But I think an even more important statistic, perhaps, is that 98% of Earth's biosphere, 98% of the livable, habitable planet where life can exist on Earth is water, is ocean. If we look at Earth from space, we see that instantly that we not only live in this beautiful blue jewel floating out in the darkness of space, but we live on an ocean world. Scientists have told us that we need to protect 30 to 40% of Earth's oceans to have a healthy future. What does that mean, a healthy future? Well, every other breath that you take, no matter where you live, if you live in San Diego or Maine where I live, or Nebraska or the middle of the Sahara Desert, every other breath that you take comes from the sea. It is the greatest carbon sink on Earth. We know about forests and rainforests and plants, how they process carbon and give us back oxygen, which is very true. But the ocean is the greatest carbon sink on Earth. It takes in more carbon, gives us back more oxygen. Today, we have only protected maybe 5% of Earth's oceans, depending how you describe protection. So we're a long way off from that 30 to 40%. And we've actually expelled so much carbon into the atmosphere that we are changing the ocean's chemistry. It is like a sponge that can absorb no more water. And this is the ocean that is having a difficult time processing carbon now because we've put so much out there. We've burned so many fossil fuels that the ocean is becoming saturated, and something known as ocean acidification is occurring. And that means that the pH levels of ocean seawater are rising because of that carbon, which makes the ocean acidic. And when the ocean becomes acidic, it erodes all of these things that live in it. So coral reefs that are made of calcium are eroded. All the animals that have seashells are eroded. These baseline sources of protein like pteropods and copepods and krill, these tiny little animals that giant whales and seabirds and everything else rely on for nutrition, are eroding. So it is a domino effect because of these anthropogenic climate change actions, that we have created because of the burning of fossil fuels and methane and all these other things that we're doing. Okay, so that is sort of the pretext for what's going on. And as a visual storyteller, what I'm trying to do is help people understand, viewers, audiences, understand what does that mean? There, as you said, there may still be a lot of people out there who either don't believe that humans are responsible for this, or that they think it's something that's going to happen a long time from now, some sort of natural geologic process, or that it's not happening here where I live. It's somewhere in the poles, in the Arctic, in the Antarctic, but it's not going to affect me. But it's affecting you right now, today. I mean, there was a Hurricane Beryl and hit Texas, and they're saying that this is an anomalous, right? It's warmer. Those seawaters around there are warmer, and that the strength of the hurricane and so forth. So we're seeing this stuff right now, but we're seeing it in the Gulf of Maine. So this project, Sea Change, was created because the latest science is revealing that this body of water known as the Gulf of Maine, and let me describe where that is. The Gulf of Maine is not just off the coast of Maine in the United States. It is a body of water that stretches from Cape Cod, Massachusetts in the south up through the Canadian Maritimes, through Nova Scotia, New Brunswick in the north. So it straddles two countries, a number of U.S. states, and it is a body of water that in no small way fostered the colonization of America. The Basques, the Portuguese, the French came over in the 14th century, the 15th century to this North American continent because of codfish, because of the bounty, the richness of bounty that was in the ocean in these Gulf of Maine waters. They thought it was limitless. It built the aristocracies, the codfish aristocracies in Massachusetts. There's still a codfish over the State House in Massachusetts. It built empires. Yet today, we are at 1% of codfish levels. We have fished out 99% of them. And that's just one of the anthropogenic stresses. But climate now is the biggest stressor that's happening. So this place is warming 97% faster than the rest of the global ocean. And it's due to things like Arctic glaciers in places like Greenland that are melting, introducing fresh water into the ocean, changing the currents that are very precise. In the Gulf of Maine, for example, the reason it's been such a proliferation of life since the last ice age and the Laurentian ice sheets retreated, the reason it's been so rich is because it had all these sediment bottoms. It had a rocky coast in Maine. It had shoaly, sandy coast on the western coast in Cape Cod. The eastern edge was the continental shelf, where you had these nutrient-rich upwelling currents bringing all this cold, nutrient-rich water. You had the Gulf Stream coming up from the south. south, a Labrador current coming down from the north, and a counterclockwise current in the Gulf of Maine. That, it's like making a perfect cake or a perfect recipe. You have all the right ingredients. Now you have to mix them perfectly. You get seasonal stratification because it's in a temperate location. In New England, you get 4 seasons, so the ocean turns over, and you get this explosion of life. But now those currents are shutting down. The Labrador current, which brought the cold water down from Canada, is now much weaker because of the fresh water and because of the melting glaciers. It's changing the density, and the Gulf Stream is having a greater influence. So it's basically this giant bathtub that you've turned off the cold water faucet and it's just cooking. And this has serious, implications for species and for humans. So I can get into that, but I've been talking for a few minutes, so I'll stop for just a moment.
Well, I mean, I will say what you did was cause me to, like I told you, I learned so much about Maine. I didn't know
Mm,
about Maine. I knew where it was. I didn't know where the Gulf of Maine was. I didn't know all of those things that you just described. I
mm,
didn't understand where to find clams or where they lived or what they looked like. I didn't understand how much those clams and those fish and all of that influenced the life and the culture and the economics of, the upper Massachusetts and Maine and all of that area, and how much it's affected things now. I didn't even know what lobsters looked like as babies, or how
mm.
they laid their eggs, or even that they laid eggs. I didn't know all those things. And so they were fascinating. The fact that I could see a tiny little infant lobster in its beautifulness. It made me care about those things for sure. And so it educated me in ways that I needed.
Yeah.
And I did learn about what that water warming does to all of those things, and not only how it, impacts the creatures there, but also how it impacts us ultimately, which you would think that would motivate us, to
Mm,
care even more, which I don't know why it doesn't. But,
yep.
and the other things that you did do is you gave hope with the
Mm,
people that are trying to conserve and trying to study and learn more. And you introduced us to some incredible characters.
wow.
What I loved about your documentary series is that you picked out some people to talk with who are absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating and adorable, and you just love them, and you want to hop on a boat with them or go dig up some clams with them. It just was, the characters were great.
Well,
So I did love that
you,
for
you know,
sure.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And you get to something that I should obviously mention, that with sea change, it we had to approach it as kind of a blue chip natural history documentary when it came to the wildlife stuff. We had to film alewife and these little fish in rivers, and we had to film seabirds and terns or puffins and lobsters, of course, and seals, and all of these different things that we had to approach in the sort of traditional blue chip way. But sea change also is a people story, as you just pointed out. Whether it's a scallop diver or a Native American clammer who's trying to stop the invasive species of little green crabs that are coming in and eating the baby clams before they can grow big, and then it had to be a documentary about this threat of climate change, which is a little more sciencey, of course, and we're trying to explain why this is happening and what the consequences means. It means that there are invasive species that are thriving now because of the warmer water, that the native species are no longer there. They're disappearing. We're losing kelp forest. We interviewed Doug Rasher, a scientist who's been studying kelp forests in the Gulf of Maine for over a decade and shows this steady decline from south to north as the water is warming and those kelp forests are going away. And that's critical habitat for all these various animals and so forth. So there are people's stories, which I think is what audiences relate to. Or we are a storytelling culture, right? I mean, I will believe you if I'm sitting with you over a cup of coffee and you say, "Hey, I saw this. I know this happened," and then somebody shows me the science to back up what you saw, and then we have the visuals where somebody can show you a film that says this is what's happening. Now you've got this trifecta that I think is very powerful in terms of affecting awareness and change, ideally. And this is it is a regional story with global implications. What we are learning in the Gulf of Maine, this very industrialized region that, as I say, in many respects built the early days of America. The Gulf of Maine in the 19 whatever it was 50s or whatever, Clarence Birdseye, they figured out flash freezing on ships, so all the codfish was turned into fish sticks. I remember my mother buying fish sticks at the grocery store and eating those as a kid. Well, a lot of that came from the Gulf of Maine. It fed this country. This is a very innovative region. It's a economic powerhouse. The richest fishery in America is the Maine lobster industry. It's hovered somewhere around $600 million annually for the last several years. However, there are serious threats. Climate change is impacting those lobsters, and it's not just the warm water that's going to make them, march up to Canada, which is likely happening. But there's other things, those currents that are changing that I described. The first 30 days of a lobster's life is as a larval lobster, various stages, and they float around for 30 days up in the water column, and they historically get deposited close to shore in a cobblestone bottom where they have a high likelihood of recruitment. They have a high chance of growing to be a big lobster because they can hide from predators. But now, because the currents are changing, scientists think they're being deposited in deeper water offshore where they may not make it to a high chance of recruitment. They may die before they get to be an adult. They're also the thing that they eat. The predominant food that a larval lobster likes to eat is something called a copepod, which are comprised of 72% lipids, these rich fats that help them, gain weight and become big lobsters. Well, there's a mismatch now from the time that the copepods appear. They're still, the lobsters are still showing up in, like, say, April, May or something, but the copepods, which used to show up at that time of year, now are showing up in January or December because the water is warmer. So they're not getting their nutrition. And even the copepods are not all 72% lipids now. Their percentage of fat is reduced because of the warming water. So, there's all of these factors, and some of it's easy maybe to glaze over, but that's why with the visual storytelling, we've got people out there who can articulate these stories. They're seeing it, whether it's a scientist or a fisherman, they're seeing this stuff. And then we have the visuals to sort of support both of those things.
Yeah, well, there is no question that the message comes across very clearly. And I think it was important for me that you led with the people, because I did find the people fascinating, endearing. I really liked them all. And I hurt for them because their living was impacted. And you could see how hard they worked and how much they had been affected since they were young. And even more so, how it impacted their children and the next generation. I love that you paired the fathers with the sons, and you showed that generational impact. So it was super well done. It did also leave me feeling very discouraged in that. What do we do? I can do things on a very small level, of course, which I do try to do. I can do things with my vote, which I do try to do. But at the end of the day, our country is divided in half, and we are stuck in a I don't know, and
Well,
at
you know,
loggerheads
yeah,
for how major change is going to happen. And so hearing this, that's why I'm saying hearing this climate change message over and over again is true, but it feels overwhelming. And after a while, it's hard to listen to because
mm,
you just want to throw up your hands and say, I don't know what
yeah.
else to do.
Yeah, you're right on the money as usual, and I don't disagree with anything you said. I think for me, and again for some context, the 26-year career with National Geographic magazine, there has been sort of an evolution in my storytelling. In the beginning, I just wanted to do adventurous things and stories about animals that I was interested in that I thought maybe other people would be interested in. And I was very siloed. I'd do a story on whatever, great white sharks or sea turtles or whatever. And over the time, I had the luxury by working with many different scientists and sort of parachuting into their worlds. All of a sudden, I began to see the three dimensionality of this world and how everything is connected. And that the leatherback sea turtles were, feeding on jellyfish in the same place that, mola mola were doing their thing, or that whales were doing their thing. And I saw that this beautiful machine, our planet, our universe, that everything is connected to everything else. And I believe, we're obviously intimately connected to all of that as well. So my storytelling evolved to where I started doing stories about environmental threats to the planet. In 2004, I did my first big cover story for National Geographic. It was about harp seals, the beautiful little white seal pups. And I went into it initially just wanting to do a pure natural history story above and below the ice, at this snapshot of the life cycle when they are mating and courting and pupping and so forth. But I realized that even then, in 2002 and 2003, when I was working on that story, that climate change was a big issue, that the pup mortality rate was increasing because of the decline of sea ice, that they didn't have a stable platform to nurse from their mothers, and they were falling into the ocean before they were ready, and they were dying, and therefore that was going to be a big threat. So I focused on that, and then I did a global fisheries cover story about the problems of industrialized overfishing, that we had taken 90% of the big fish out of the ocean post World War II because we got so good at figuring out where the fish were. And so I did a lot of these what I would call doom and gloom kind of stories where I tried to balance the celebratory with the issues. But there's pictures of sharks being finned or dead sharks in nets. But I think people are mature enough to be able to handle that. We can look at those pictures, we can look at pictures of conflict zones, Ukraine or wherever, and understand what's going on and make informed decisions based on that journalism. It's very, very important. But I also realize that people protect what they love. So, I don't want to lose sight of that. So even with Secrets of the Whales, which was a magazine story, a book, and a documentary series, it wasn't overtly about conservation at all. It was about the latest and greatest science that was revealing that whales have deep culture like humans. They have singing competitions, they have parenting techniques, they have feeding strategies within the same species like humans. You like a certain kind of food if you live in France, and if you live in America, you're eating something different. Well, but we're the same species. DNA, is the same. Same thing with whales. So my hope was that people would see the planet through the lens of culture with another species and want to protect those whales because they have babies like us, and their mothers mourn when the orca mother is carrying a dead calf on her head. So those were the kinds of things I want to do. But with sea change, I feel that, again, is as despondent as we can become about the situation in the country or the world or whatever, we have two choices. We can throw up our hands or roll up in the fetal position in the corner and, just resign ourselves to defeat, or we can do what we do. We are storytellers, and we have a tool. We can present truthful evidence to people, and in my case, it's that trifecta. It's the personal stories. I can tell people what I'm seeing out there, what I've seen over 47 years. I can present the science, and I present the video or the stills or whatever it might be that support those other two things, and let people make informed decisions. And if you're a trusted brand, and PBS in this case is a trusted brand, National Geographic is a trusted brand, and I feel good working with trusted brands that are putting forth my stories, my messages, our collective stories, the team, and let people make those decisions. I think, we do feel helpless. There are things individuals can do, but you hit it on the head. Voting is a big part of it. I mean, governments can enact marine protected areas. In the entire Gulf of Maine, there is not a single no-take marine protected area. There's not one. And here we are, it's a valuable area. It's a rich economic area, supports the country, and yet we don't have a single place when scientists are saying we should protect 30 to 40% of Earth's oceans. So, the message here is that we don't give up, that we find ways to pivot. There are fishermen who are augmenting their wild caught fisheries with aquaculture. They're farming kelp. They're raising mussels in shellfish farms and so forth. They're finding ways to maintain that economic supremacy, and yet recognizing that there's a problem, and I think we have to be able to do both at the same time, and make informed decisions about who we elect and who is going to make our decisions for us at the federal level.
Well, what I love is I did love that you did give that hope of people that do come together and care enough to say, it doesn't really matter what the politics are, because the politics may or may not change. We may or may not have control over that. But what do we have control over? We have control over what we do right here in this mudflat. We have control over coming together as a group of people to care about these birds. We have control over what we can study and the information we can put out there. We are humans and we can solve problems. So let's come together and solve these problems. So I did love that hope that you gave. Again, the people that were solving those problems were endearing and creative. And I was so thankful to learn about them. We are over time, but I cannot go along anymore without asking you some specifics of how you filmed some of these things, because I'm dying to know. You talked about the lobster and the scene where this mother is carrying her babies for, I don't know, months on time underneath her tail, stuck with her little I don't know what they're called, but stuck to her. Her swimmerettes. And then she finds a rocky place and she drops them there.
Yeah.
So how the heck, A, do you know where she's going to be and where she's going to lay them? How do you have a camera there ready for her to do that? How do you get that close up? It just baffles me.
Right. Well, it's a great question. And the answer is that, first of all, with all the natural history, we're doing extreme diligence. We're doing a lot of research. And again, in this particular case, this is a region that I grew up in. I've been diving these waters for over 4 decades. I know where to go to see things. I've talked to divers, even though, for the last 26 years, running around the world for National Geographic, I wasn't diving in New England as much. I have a lot of friends and colleagues and divers and other photographers who were seeing things. So I'm sort of plugged into those networks. So I know where things are happening. But, I've been working on this project in one way or another for 4 years. So I'm out there in my own boat and diving in places and coming up with nothing a lot of times, but other times finding things, and then, being nimble, being able to go out on short notice when the weather is clear and we can get out. I mean, this is one of the real obstacles in this project, was that the weather up here is bad. Climate change is actually making it worse. We're getting a lot of rain events that we never used to get. And that means the rivers are running off all this muck and stuff that makes the visibility out there where we're trying to shoot in the ocean really poor. Some days it's like swimming in coffee. So there's all these obstacles. So the bottom line, to answer your question, is that we're doing a lot of research where we're going out day after day and working these subjects. So whether it's alewife or birds or seals or lobsters or green crabs or whatever it might be, we're working it repeatedly. We're finding these places through research and exploration, and then we're going in with great camera teams. I would say, and I don't know the exact number, but I would say the ratio in terms of our natural history shooting, I would say probably 95% was all done in the wild completely. There were a couple of scenes one of which was the lobsters with the eggs that was impossible to do underwater. We were working with in the wild. We were working with lobster scientists who said that, a lot of that happens in caves, or sort of little rocky dens. There's no way you could get in there. You're not going to even know if the female is there with eggs and so forth. So we recreated those in captivity under the guidance of scientists at a laboratory in Maine. So for those scenes where, you describe the eggs on the swimmerettes and the tail and releasing that particular scene was done in captivity, but maintaining authenticity with the actual situation that occurs in the ocean based on.
Okay, well, all right. So that was recreated. However, my point still is there are so many of them done in the wild.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I could name birds where a special little bird was swallowing the wrong fish because it couldn't swallow it because it was the wrong fish that was supposed to be there. And you caught it right at that moment.
Yeah.
So there are so many where, you already have a camera there in the wild where something happens that's exactly what you need.
Yeah,
how
100%.
how do you get the camera where you want it to be when you need to capture a thing?
Well, this just takes time, Christian. I mean, we invest a great deal of time being out there in the field. I would camp out for weeks. And again, I want to give a huge shout out to the researchers. I describe what I do often as parachuting into the world of these people who have dedicated their lives to knowing the behavior of these animals. So in the case of the birds, these were terns, common terns, a real bellwether for climate change in many places in the ocean. And yeah, they're used to feeding their chicks slender-bodied silverfish, which they can easily swallow. And now, because of warming sea temperature, the water is raised in temperature, those native species are not available anymore. So they're going out and grabbing these, I wouldn't necessarily call them invasive species, but they're species like butterfish that were not abundant here, but now they're moving in from the south, and they're silver, but they're wide-bodied. So the parent doesn't know the difference necessarily. They see a silverfish, they go out and grab it, bring it to their chick, but the chick can't swallow it. It's too big.
It's so sad.
Yeah, so they're either choking or spitting it out. So we're spending weeks out there, or our cameramen are, and trying to, acclimate themselves to these bird communities, putting up blinds or working with the researchers who have established blinds over the last 10 years. So we're using long lenses, we're waiting for the right moment when the parent comes back with the butterfish and the light is right and the angle is right, and we can't really move, we can't walk into them because we'll scare them. So we have to be completely invisible. And with patience and time, usually you can get what you need.
Yeah, so a lot of patience, a lot of time, a lot of research. I mean, and then you find surprising things. I was stunned that, a peregrine falcon can't catch a bird, and yet a seagull can catch the same bird.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
I know, the sandpipers up there, they're just flying around in these massive flocks, and you got a falcon that you think is the supreme predator of the air, master of the air, and they can't do it. And then this lowly seagull is getting one after another. Or
that a bird would eat a bird. I never knew that. I was very sad to find that out.
I know.
Yes. Well, as you can see, it was very, it made a big impression on me, your series. And I do hope that people will take time to watch this. I know it's going to be on PBS Nova. People are going to listen to this podcast all over. Where are they how can they find this series? It starts July 24th, but how can they find it?
Yeah, your local PBS station. It'll be international, actually. It's distributed internationally, but certainly in the United States, it's on every PBS channel. It will be available. Sea Change, as you said, dropping on July 24th. I think there is also a streaming option as well. So if you can go to pbs.com, you should be able to find Sea Change on there and stream it, even if you don't watch it on television.
Okay. And if people wanted to learn more about Brian Skerry, where do they go?
You can certainly go to my website, brianskerry.com. I'm also on social media, so I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, so forth, and I'm posting about new projects and things that are important to me.
Wonderful. All right, now it is time for everybody's favorite segment, which we love to call DocuView Dèjà Vu.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we asked you to bring one of your favorite documentaries that you would like to recommend to everyone. And you've worked on so many. I'm sure you've watched so many. You've referenced several before earlier. But what did you pick?
Well, I had one in mind, and I'm still going to mention it. It's a natural history documentary that was done by a friend of mine. It's called Billy and Molly. And it's about a guy in the UK who befriends a river otter, and it's a wonderful story of this guy sort of coming around to this otter's point of view. It's done by directed by my friend Charlie Hamilton James, also a Nat Geo photographer who did a marvelous job. It's a great human story. I think it'll warm people's hearts and make them very happy. But I also wanted to squeeze in. I watched one last night. It just debuted on HBO, and it's about Stevie Van Zandt. It's called Stevie Van Zandt Disciple. And Stevie Van Zandt, of course, the great guitar player for the E Street Band with Bruce Springsteen and actor in The Sopranos. And I actually stumbled upon it yesterday. It was at Tribeca, I guess. But anyway, on HBO now, and it just fantastic. I mean, there's so many other people. Joan Jett's in it, and Jackson Browne, and Paul McCartney, and all these great things. But talk about a guy who just never quit. I mean, so much I learned. I thought I knew a lot about Stevie, but boy, it was wonderful.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I love it that you brought two because I didn't bring one today. So you brought one for me instead. Yeah. Listen, Brian, it has been just wonderful to have you here. You have been a boatload of information, and I just loved learning from you today. And I look forward to seeing more of your works. I do hope you'll come back in the future and talk to us a little bit more. I didn't even get to, half of my other questions, so we have plenty more to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm grateful. Be happy to come back.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody, this has been Documentary First, where we believe everybody has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody.